Okay, well, welcome everybody to the Better World Leaders podcast, and welcome Paul Dunn from B1G1. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Tim, thank you so much for having me. And I can't help thinking, whenever you created the name for the podcast, you were sort of future pacing. I mean, what a great podcast for now, Better World. So well done, you.
Thank you, thank you. It's like a lot of things in life. You have an idea and you kind of camp on it for a little bit too long, and then you just finally say, right, yep, I'm going to do it. If I'd done this 6 months ago, maybe I'd appear to be even more, on trend, if not trend creating. But no, I agree. And thank you for saying that. I can't think of a better time in recent history, to be talking about this theme of how can leaders make
Yeah.
the world better. And really, we need it now more than ever, right?
Yeah, we absolutely do. That's
And
that's
just
why it's a privilege to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
No, my pleasure. And just before we sort of get into the sort of standard, sort of questions, let's just set the context. We're sitting here in early April 2020. I'm, sort of isolating in New South Wales. You're in Singapore. Just tell us a little bit about, sort of what it's like in Singapore and what you guys are going through up there.
Well, yes, I think the key thing is everything's changing in a second. It used to take a year, right? So, but I think that Singapore is a great example of a lot of things. And as you well know, Singapore has been lauded for its response to what's been happening. And I think there's a great message in that. The whole messaging has been certainty, 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 certainty. That's the whole message, right? And the point is, it's almost as if the government, and this is very, very important for us dealing with our customers and potential customers now. In a world of uncertainty, what people need is certainty. And when we can connect with them and provide that certainty, whether it's about the structures that we talk about, I mean, when I say structures, I don't mean, buildings. What I mean is the structures of the conversations, the structure of the offering, all of that kind of stuff. And so anything that we can do, like the government here in Singapore, to provide that certainty just creates a different environment. And when you create that different environment, you get better results. And that's precisely the job of leaders. I mean, so, I think it's a fantastic example of what's going on here in Singapore.
No, you're completely right. I mean, one of my clients, it's probably now 2 weeks ago, made me aware of one of these sort of particularly pivotal speeches that the Singaporean Prime Minister gave, and he said, this was shown to me as a great example of inspirational leadership through this particularly trying time, and I've now included it, in some of the sort of the newsletter to my community.
Yeah.
And it's exactly that. It's that certainty, which need be as little as this is what we know today. Based on what we know today, this is what we're going to do. Be reassured that we're doing everything in our power and that we're putting you, the people of Singapore, first.
Yeah. And I think the messaging is really, really crucial for all of us as leaders. I mean, you can't do this sort of Pollyanna thing. What we've really got to say is, we know that we're going to get through this. That's human history, right? We're going to get through this. What we also know is that when we get to the other side, it's going to look quite different than it did before we get into it, right? So what we've got to do together is to do things that make us get through this so that we are well prepared for the other side, right? Because it's just going to be a different world, thankfully. And I think that the role that leaders play in that is crucial. And the other thing that's really, really interesting about that is that, listening was always, right, a crucial idea for leaders. I mean, it always was. But I think many of the people that I work with now, when we give them that message and basically saying, by the way, you might want to try listening to the team as well at this particular point, because the reality is that there's so much wisdom there. And so what I'm seeing as well is this whole thing from going from, quote unquote, the wisdom of one to the wisdom of the collective. And it just makes for such a better trajectory. It really does.
No, it's very true. I mean, there's a phrase which is, really being bandied about at the moment. It's an old adage, but never let a good crisis go to waste. And when it comes to building community, I mean, certainly what I've witnessed here, where I live, in southern New South Wales, we've had, an interesting sort of run of bushfire, really extreme, sort of fire threat, closely followed by flooding. Not sort of dangerous flooding, it wasn't flash flooding and people weren't immediately at risk, but there was a lot of impact on social infrastructure, particularly agricultural production, for a good sort of month-long spell. And now here we are with COVID-19. But what I've observed locally, and I think it's now interesting to see, this really sort of global envelope expanding, is that, a sort of a crisis, a good crisis, brings good people together, and really sort of shows the other people up, for the way that they look at the world and how it is about them. And I think that this really is now becoming a global experience of community and coming together and focusing on what's important. And I think ultimately that starts with reconnecting.
Oh yeah, and that's absolutely true. And when we realize that we really are all one in this, it becomes a different experience. And so hopefully, our memory cells are working overtime to go, yes, okay, I got that. Now that's what I need to do when we're out the other side. Yeah. So it's and that's by the way, not to diminish or in any way. I mean, I think we need to take time out to acknowledge all of the people who are at the front line and just doing amazing things. To just be continually grateful for all the things that they are doing and providing, a bigger margin of safety for us as they can. So to all the health workers that might be listening and all the frontline people, thank you for everything you do.
Yeah, I mean, and, even, sort of the humble truck driver, right? Who's keeping going and sort of keeping on and keeping the system alive. And especially those who really are putting themselves, sort of, and everybody that they, sort of then come into contact in their own families at risk by continuing to show up and continuing to treat. Those who.
Well, I mean, here in Singapore, we can still go on buses and all of that sort of stuff, and the transport system is really amazing here. But now I'm dubbing. Here's the message, right? I think the crucial thing here is to double down on relationships. That's one of the crucial things. And that's not just relationships in your team. That's relationships with your customers and people. I mean, simple example, yesterday I had to go into town here. And the simplest way to do it was to get a cab. And so, I called a cab, and that's pretty easy to do in Singapore. And cab driver comes, and always I would thank them for turning up. I always do that. But yesterday it was, an extra special sort of a thank you, because they didn't have to do it. And the guy turned around, seriously, and said, it's my absolute, they called me, the little message on his thing called me Mr. Paul, right? So he said, it's my privilege to be of service, Mr. Paul. I thought, wow. So, yeah. And you can't help have a better day around that, can you?
No, you can't. And I'm gonna be grateful for that man's sort of expression of service. I'm going to use that maybe a little bit awkwardly as a segue to ask you, Mr. Paul, how you've been of service, and I'm going to sort of wrench us off this one rail just to sort of bring us onto the track of the conversation around what brings you to this point. So let's just ask the question around your sort of history and your career, and really sort of what have you done to be of service throughout your career?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. And classically, what we're all supposed to have is the sort of Joseph Campbell, hero's journey kind of thing. And I suppose there are moments like that, and we might talk about moments later on. But I look at it now, and I'm just amazingly grateful, because I think I've just been amazingly lucky. I really do. How lucky is it to get plucked out of the United Kingdom when you're 21 years old and become one of the first 10 in in Hewlett Packard in Australia. That's kind of like you won the lottery, right? And, being able to sit around with Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, and then to recognize just last November, I was on a plane going to San Jose to speak, and San Jose, of course, is is at the middle of Silicon Valley, right? So I'm going there, and I'm going there to speak to some 5,300 accountants, which is like an interesting gig.
Sure. They can have fun too.
Anyway, on the airplane, when they feed you lovely meals and stuff like that, that's when I always take a moment to have a look at what documentaries are on. And there was a documentary, funnily enough, which was on Silicon Valley, the real Silicon Valley. And what it observed was that way back when, it was Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard who were in their garage, and they established Silicon Valley, right? So there's all these really interesting links. And then, to go from that to create one of Australia's first computer companies, which was just extraordinary. To go from that and get literally dragged to a seminar before we knew what seminars were. And to have this amazing moment when I realized, I'm loving what I do, but maybe there's a better expression of me. And that better expression of me was to realize that I had some things that I could share. And so I decided that that's what I was going to do. And I created a thing called Results Corporation. In various guises, that was there until 2000, working with some 23,000 small to medium scale businesses, not just in Australia, but around the world. That's just an amazing experience, because you're seeing things through different lenses the whole time, right? And then theoretically, Tim, I sold, well, not theoretically, I did sell all of that. And theoretically, the reason for that was because I was supposed to retire. Now, you're probably getting from hopefully from the joy in my voice, that retiring is
I was just going to say, how's that
that
going
was
for you,
not
Paul?
a good
Because you seem to
option.
be pretty active
not a good
for
option.
a retiree, I must say.
Yeah. And but it was, it was fun. I mean, I was fortunate enough to go live in France and all of that kind of stuff. And that didn't last that long, although it was an amazing experience, right? Again, I got lucky. And then to have one of those moments that we all have when you realize, and this was in 2006 for me, 2006, 2007, when you realize, there's something else here. If you would have described, or if you would have asked me at that point, Paul, you've done, pretty well, and so on and so forth. And so what's the secret, right? And I would have said, well, there are two things, right? I would have said, first thing is that it's all about providing just extraordinary value for the people whom you're privileged to serve. That's job number one. And job number two is to have fun doing that. That's it, right? And that would be the two things, right? And then in 2006, 2007, I realized, there's another thing. And there was a whole experience around that, which is a bit long to tell. So I won't tell it, but let me just say that I realized there's more to life than that, and that is that there is an opportunity, and it gets back to what you were talking about earlier on, that to recognize, that we all are one, and to recognize how privileged we are. And it was an experience that was all tied up with the 2004 tsunami, and I saw that through a different set of eyes, and I realized, oh my gosh, there was a third thing that we have an option, almost an obligation to do, and that is to give, literally to give. And that was when B1G1 came into notion. And by the way, I was just reflecting on that the other day. As you look at today, and you write, and you say, yes, crisis, and challenging, and all of that kind of stuff. And there's various ways that we can approach that, right? One way is to approach it and go, oh my God, this, the fear thing kicks in, and we just drift down. The other way to approach it is, well, let's look at, how we can do different things and sort of go upwards as opposed to downwards. And I was thinking about that the other day, about going upwards, and I came up with this phrase, which I think makes sense, which is this. And by the way, I've only been playing with it for 2 days, so it may need checking up.
So we give you the caveat that this is new and a bit fresh.
Yes. So, and what it says is, we're actually all at our very best when we're giving. You might want to think about that, right? We're at our very best when we're giving. And that's true in leadership, it's true in the family, it's true in the way in which we run our businesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, so there you go. That's the potted history. But so many learnings along the way, and to realize that, where we are now, wherever, you are listening to this, right? Wherever you are now is just a result of all of those moments that have kind of happened, right? And how you respond in those moments becomes who you are right now. And just to be grateful for those in every way that you can.
No, look, I mean, that's a fantastic story. I mean, you have such a great, sort of place that you've come from, and all the episodes that have informed, sort of your journey on the way. But I don't think that phrase needs much revision. I think that's a perfect expression, of who you are and what you have brought to the world, and what B1G1 does. And we'll just unpack the B1G1, sort of in a moment. But I'd just like to respond, to that phrase, and just reference a couple of my experiences, and one in particular, when I was basically volunteering along with my wife, in southern Peru, in a region that had been impacted by an earthquake, a year before, but we're still kind of putting the pieces back together. And we were basically building a school, and I was not in work mode at all. This was during the GFC, and my wife and I, both of us, had sort of said, okay, well, pretty sort of stressful doing what we're doing, and it's probably not going to sort of, be great anytime soon. So let's take this opportunity to, learn from each other and about each other and go on the road together. And in this environment, we just rocked up, basically, sort of picked up a hammer from the market and showed up on the job site. And within a couple of days, basically the guy who was running, the Peruvian guy who was running the whole sort of thing on the ground, had sort of come to me and sort of said, well, can you run this job site? Because it's not happening. It's not coming together. And I said, well, no, hang on, mate. I'm not a builder. I'm not a tradie. I don't know anything about, sort of putting this thing together. And he said, no, that's good. We've got plenty of people who know how to, sort of put a frame up. What we don't have is people who can, kind of bring the whole thing together. And I asked my wife, Belle, about this, and she said, no, I've seen you, because you're not thinking about what's in it for me, because you're just here to do and give whatever you can. So really the best, of you as a leader is coming out.
Yes.
The real identification and just living a values, just constantly, without having to think about it, without having to reference the words on the wall. And you and I have spoken about this in conversations previously. I think Adam Grant, in his great book Give and Take, has done such a good job of sort of proving for business and for organizations that are explicitly for profit, and especially for those that are not, that really encouraging your teams, and your leaders within your organizations to focus on the benefits of giving for them, for their team, for the organization is just now effectively empirically proven to be true. So, Paul Dunn, you're at your best when you're giving. Tell us about B1G1. Tell us about how this all got started.
Okay. How it got started, I was in someone I was mentoring, Masami Sato. And in the mentoring, you know, Tim, because of what you do, that when you're mentoring, the idea is that you're the one that asks the questions, right? And the other one, the other person sort of deals with it. And so she comes into this thing, and it was very obvious, very, very obvious that she had been someplace. And I don't mean that she, you just in her head, it was very obvious that she'd been thinking very, very deeply about some things, very, very obvious. And so she began the conversation this particular day, and she said, Paul, is it okay if I ask the questions today? Or I begin by asking questions? I said, sure. And she said, well, it's not really a question. I just want you to imagine something. And I said, okay, go. So she said, well, and this lovely Japanese accent and slowly paced, she said, I want you to imagine a different world. I want you to imagine a world in which every time business is done, something great happens in our world. And I remember thinking, oh, well, okay. So, you know, I said, oh, yeah, like what, right? And she said, which was not a good response, by the way. And she said, well, I've called it in my head, so I've called it buy one, give one. And I said, well, how would that work? And she said, well, you imagine you go down to Harvey Norman was the word she actually used, and you go to, you know, like an electrical retailer, and you buy a plasma TV. And I said, woo, Sammy, stop. If I go to an electrical retailer and buy a plasma TV, what did you call it? Buy one, give it. They're not going to give me another TV, right? They're not, right? And she said, no, you misunderstand. And I said, what is it I misunderstand? And she said, well, you go and buy that TV on account of how you want better vision. So how would it be if when you bought that TV, bearing in mind you're doing it because you want better vision, if when you did that, someone who could not see got the gift of sight? I was like, oh, I mean, it was exactly like that. And then she saw the impact of what, you know, the breath of air, the suck of air that I was doing. And she said, or, you know, imagine when you had a cup of coffee, when you bought a cup of coffee, you know, a child got access to pure life-saving water. Or, and then she had one of my books with her, and she said, or, you know, when someone bought a book, a tree got planted. And I remember saying to her, that was so impactful. I said, Masami, can I be your mentor for the rest of your life? And she eventually agreed to that. And so that started that journey in 2007. And that simple little idea, once again, wouldn't it be a great world if every time business was done, something great happened? I mean, it really would. And it's now a movement. You know, there are 3,000 business members around the world that are part of it. And it has some pretty unique things, as in we measure every impact and so on. You can give from 1 cent and so on and so forth, and 100% goes. And the great thing is that it's a place where people come together, as you know, and right now we are at just over 205 million giving impacts. And by the way, just on that, yesterday, because I think now this whole time now is about doubling down on the relationship. You know, that's what it is about. Now, so just yesterday, I was sitting here. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and obviously, and I'm going through. You look at all these givings that have come in and stuff like that, and I decided that I would just get on and I would message everybody, and I said, you know, individually, basically, and I rather than call them, and I simply because of the timing, and I said, you know, I just want to say that it takes a very special person at these times to be giving, you know, to think of others, and I just wanted to let you know that, you know, I'm deeply grateful for that. Well, you wouldn't believe the messages that I woke up to this morning. You wouldn't believe it.
Would you be happy to share a couple
People
of
are saying things like, it's you know, Paul, that was lovely, but you know, you just need to know it's such a privilege to be able to do this. So, you know, it's like,
yeah.
So it's just an amazing thing, really is.
Yeah. So, I mean, what does it feel like when you receive a message like that? Can you describe you know, how you were feeling as you read those this morning?
Well, I mean, just you asking that question, it brought up exactly the same feeling. It's like you get this feeling in your chest, you know, And then again, it's a very humbling thing, to it's difficult to talk about, actually.
Sure.
It's a very humbling thing to be a part of that happening. It's just incredibly humbling. So
Let me ask you another
that is hard
question.
to talk about, Tim. You can see my eyes right now.
I
That is
can,
hard to talk about.
and even if I couldn't, I can hear it in your voice. So I appreciate you sort of, sticking with us. What's the best thing that's happened since you started B1G1?
So again, what's the best thing?
What's the best thing that's happened since you started B1G1?
Oh, that would. Oh, they, they happen every day. So that's a hard one. So let me just look at a recent one that has something to do with leadership. I remember years ago, I was reading Neil Donald Walsh's one of Neil Donald Walsh's books, and Neil said something pretty profound. He said, that you don't measure a leader by the number of followers that they have. You measure a leader by the number of leaders they create. And I thought, whoa, that's pretty cool. And so one of the good things right now, I look at upon B1G1 as my sort of teenage child, right? So it's getting heavily teenage. And, so hopefully it's had the guidance and hopefully some wisdom along there. But then you get to a point where you go, it's time to sort of step back from that a little bit and let everybody do, their thing, if you know what I mean. But everybody assume a position of ownership. I don't necessarily mean ownership in the strict sense of the word, although that's a good thing too. But just a feeling of real belonging and a feel that they're in control of their destiny. And when leaders can create an environment like that, it's just the best thing. It is just the best thing. And every day we have a team huddle, right? Every day, even when we're working from home.
Yeah.
And at 9:50 every morning, Singapore time, and it's really cool. We're sitting here and we can see each other, and we're talking about our values, and everybody gets an opportunity every day to today might be your day, Tim, for example. And you get to talk about what's happened to you this week, which is an expression of one of those values. And so it locks everything in. And then we talk about, hey, this is what we're doing today. And everybody can say, and I need help with that, or, I'm available to help with that, and everything else. So it creates that very nice culture. And I think that's probably the thing that, because see, without that, I mean, without you can't create the great organization, because otherwise it's a sham, right? I mean, it's like you can't create an organization without realizing that, in a sense, your first customer, in a sense, right, is your team, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where it starts. And if you have that authenticity through that, then the customers read that, and it becomes a great place for them as well.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I know you shared, my view that, leaders are basically the best chance we've got to make the world better. And you have this great passion and great belief that, you aren't interested in followers. You want to, lead leaders, or you want to help other people, as I do, become great leaders. So what would you suggest leaders can do to make the world better and to lead leaders who are themselves also going to go on and make the world better? Are there a few things that you would say, if you want to be a leader who makes the world better, this is what you can do?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I think, there's a lot of stuff, and you talk about it every day, I'm sure, and as do I. And there's a lot of stuff, out there about visions and missions. And I always remember, I was in a situation, I won't name the company, but I was there, and they had this retreat, and I think retreats are bad things to have. I think we should rename those and call them forwards. But anyway, so
yes.
Yeah.
Don't run away.
Here they were discussing. Yeah, exactly. And so here they were discussing over a number of days, what the vision should be and what the mission should be and all that kind of stuff. And it's the typical long thing. And someone actually suggested, I'm not making this up, that we should put that message in the toilet so everybody sees it. And I go, what? And then you would hear people say things like, well, what I don't understand this. What's the difference between a vision and a mission? Well, we can get into articulating what the difference is, but it becomes very complex, very, very complex, and so unnecessarily complex, right? And by the way, I want to circle back to Singapore on that thing in just a moment.
Okay.
So I think that one of the things that leaders need to do is to have something bigger than themselves, right? That's absolutely, you've got to have that, right? It's some underlying purpose that is bigger than yourself. And so the purpose doesn't become, to be the best XYZ company or something like that. I was in a conversation with Simon Sinek, and Simon put it this way. He said, "True purpose is human," and that's such a perfect encapsulation of it. So yeah, and then once you've got that, is then it just becomes this. It becomes like this magnet that drives you. And so the way I talk about it is just by putting in front of it, I get up every morning too. And once everybody can be very clear about it, I get up every morning too, and then express that in the bigger picture. And by the way, just on that, you mentioned Singapore before, and not too many people realize, although when you look at history, it's obvious that Singapore is 54 years old. Everybody thinks it's a bit older than that, but when you look back, it's not actually. And there's a government building here which is called the Urban Redevelopment Authority, and the first 3 floors of that are devoted to where Singapore came from, where Singapore is, and where Singapore going. And what often happens is, of course, people who B1G1 members from around the world kind of visiting someplace, and they happen to go through Singapore. And so we frequently get calls saying, oh, can we have a cup of coffee? That sort of stuff, right? And where I take them, if we have time, is to the Urban Redevelopment Authority. And because it's just an amazing metaphor for how you grow a business. Because when you started, 54 years ago, when we started, there was nothing. We didn't have water, we didn't have vegetables, we didn't have any of that, right? So anyway, I'm doing this with a guy out of Melbourne, and this guy is there with his family, and he's an accountant, and he's very, very successful. And we're going through and looking at one of these displays, and I'm sort of moving on, and Matt is stuck to the spot, and he's looking at this thing, and I say, hey Matt, come out. He said, no. He said, Paul, just come and look at this. And what he's looking at is a plaque, and the plaque says across the top of it, our 50-year vision. That's what it says. And he's riveted to the spot. And he said, he used slightly different words than I'm about to use here, but he said, look at that, a country with a 50-year vision. And I hadn't realized that. And by the way, right next to it was, here's how we update that every year. And then it goes down to the 10-year vision, all of that kind of stuff, right? The sort of thing that you talk about in relation to moving companies forward and having that, that amazing sort of vision there. And of course, one of the things that is hopefully that when we get through this, we'll realize that having something bigger than ourselves is really the key. And being able to really articulate in super ways, how we, the kind of thing that drives us from a human point of view. And when we do that, no doubt at all, the world is going to be an infinitely better place.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're completely right. And I think now more than ever, when arguably we could be said to be in an existential crisis of sorts, at least as at a sort of societal level in terms of what we've adopted as our normal, sort of expectation, if not, quite just yet. at a sort of species and sort of global level today, at least. If you can't kind of draw down and sort of look in and find that sort of centrifugal purpose now, I don't know that you ever will. And
no, you
once you have, I think that to an extent that really is, sort of, it's not all you need, but it is sort of, it's the foundational step that you need to then get up every day saying, I'm getting up in order to, or when I get up, I will. Because it's so easy, I think, to get sort of frankly lost in uncertainty or sort of devastated by despair when everything that and you're sort of familiar with and you aspire towards is essentially at least put on hold, if not gone. You have something sort of irreducible that can keep you going. And yeah, I mean, you and I share so much, I think, but particularly that thing that, you have to have the long-term vision and the purpose. And once you're grounded around that, that's all you need to get up every day going, if I do nothing else today,
and funnily enough, that's what gives you that. Just follow the links, right? That's what gives you certainty. That's actually, I mean, what better place could we be than right now, and observe. We just look around and we go, oh, New Zealand, that's kind of interesting. Look at the certainty with which she did that.
Yes.
Oh, UK. Oh, no, that was a bit iffy. America. Well, that's really interesting because it's all about me. And so those examples are there, right? And so, how lucky are we to be in this place where we can see those examples and go, that doesn't work. This works, and that's what we've got to be, right? And we're seeing it on such a large scale. So it's really obvious now. You cannot miss it. You really can't miss it.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. Paul, I hate to do this because, as always with you, we could keep talking forever. But unfortunately, in this instance, it's me who's actually backing up against a time restraint. So just very quickly, the sort of the last question. There is a lot in the public domain about you. You're very forthcoming. 4 times TEDx speaker. So obviously people can watch those. But is there one thing in particular, based on the conversation that we've just had, that you would steer people towards if they wanted to read more of your work and find out more about you?
Tim, there's, do you mean where should they go look?
Where should they go to find more about Paul Dunn?
Yeah. Well, it's hopefully ubiquitous, but
inescapable.
Certainly a good place. A good place to start is obviously LinkedIn, and have a look there.
Sure,
and the other thing that's interesting, by the way, is that as you respond and lead certain things, then that kind of changes, and it's very interesting to go through that actually and see some of the moments, and those are the crucial things, the moments, and they go, this is where I should be, So LinkedIn is a good place. And of course, I'm sure in the show notes, you'll put various things about, if you wanted to get in touch with Paul, you can do this and so on. And I would be more than happy to connect. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we'll leave it there for today. So certainly for me and on behalf of, the Better World Leaders community that we're building, thank you. And I hope we'll talk again sometime.
Tim, thank you. It's an absolute privilege to chat with you, and thank you for all you're doing, and I underscore all in capitals. Yes, you're doing great things. So thank you.
You are too kind. Good on you. Thanks, Paul.